Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about this little guy, the Spyderco Kapara. This is a very interesting knife from Spyderco because I think it's been designed more to look good than necessarily anything else. It is an excellent knife in a lot of ways. It's running on S30V steel. It's got phosphor bronze washers. It is using the new Spyderco pivot design that they put in the CQI version of the Kapara. And it's just a great little knife, and we're going to discuss why I think so, and some of the things that I think it could maybe be worked on a little here. I really like this knife. It's got a lot of great features, but I think the first thing I like, that I think a lot of people will agree, is that this is actually like a really good looking knife. This knife was designed by a guy named Alistair Phillips, I think is probably how it's pronounced, but I'm not entirely sure. The original prototype was called the Redback, hence the slightly red backspacer here, though the original design had a much redder backspacer, which you can actually buy from Alistair Phillips himself online to fit the Kapara here, so it looks more like the original. I love this carbon fiber. I don't even know how well this translates in video form, but this is just, it's a beautiful material. It's smooth, it looks pretty. I like the detailing on the pivot here, the little like triangular shaped thing you got going on. I love the backspacer color. I like the wire clip. This knife looks really fantastic. It looks, that was a not very good flick, but it looks actually, I think, even better open. This just general profile here of this knife is just fantastic. And I think that's probably one of the things I maybe like the best about this knife is just the overall look of this knife. The other thing I like is actually this blade here. This is an S30V steel blade, which is, you know, not necessarily what we would, modern knife people would call a super steel, but you'll see here, it's running 0.11-ish thick stock. So it's not anywhere near as thick as something like your PM2, which I think is running just under 0.15. It's a very thin, very flat ground, very thin, very slicey blade. And it does a great job cutting things. It's got this, I don't even know what to call this shape of this blade. Almost like sort of sheep's footy, but not quite. It's very functional for most EDC drawing, cutting tasks. You can even do some piercing with it because it does have a little bit of a tip there. Like it's not quite as flat as like a regular sheep's foot or Warncliffe kind of blade. It's actually pretty good from that regard. I actually really like the blade. I think it's actually a really good everyday kind of knife blade. The next thing I like on this knife is actually the ergonomics. It's a Spyderco, so you know it's going to be good. Spyderco really has made their name almost off of knives that feel good in hand. And here on this back hammer style grip, I mean, you can see it fits perfectly in my hand. And then you can choke up to this finger choil here that's sort of built into the handle more than the actual blade, obviously. But you can choke up and get like really good precision cutting, and both grips feel fantastic. You don't really get any hot spotting. You can feel the clip, but it doesn't really hurt to feel the clip because it's that nice smooth wire clip that Spyderco uses. And it's just, in general, I love the feel of this knife in your hand. It's fantastic. It's a Spyderco, so it's going to feel good in hand. I've not felt many of Spyderco's knives that don't feel good in hand. The next thing I really like here is actually this wire clip. Spyderco uses this deep carry wire clip on some knives, and it does a great job. This knife disappears pretty thoroughly in your pocket. Usually just a little bit poking out the top from this design choice here. I'm guessing this is actually more safety choice, because if that extra bit wasn't there, you'd be able to get in there to that blade. So I think you can see just a little bit of this knife poking out, and I love how deep the wire clip carries, and I really like a deeper carry clip, and this is definitely one. I think a lot of Spyderco knives could use a deeper carry clip on them, or at least an option for one for people like me. So I really like the clip, and then just in general, it works pretty well. There are some issues with it. I'll discuss those a little bit later, but for the most part, I really like the clip. Next, I really like the action. The action on this knife is great. I will say, you'll find it's a little difficult to Spidey flick. I can't really do it very easily. I can do it every now and then. There we go, I got a little bit there. But that's not the part I like the most about the action. It's a very reliable thumb opener, so I'm not really that concerned about that. But right here, compression lock knife, boom. It just falls shut completely as soon as you disengage the compression lock. That's because of the CQI pivot that they put in here. I think people have called it a bushinged pivot. I'm not entirely sure all of that. But it closes so quickly. It's honestly, it's almost scary, but the best thing about it is because it's a compression lock, your fingers don't ever end up in the blade path. I know it's a big surprise to people who've seen any videos I've ever put out before that I like the compression lock, but hey, look, I like the compression lock. So for me, those are the things that I think are just like the absolute best things about this knife. The action's great, the compression lock is great, the deepness of the carry of the clip here is great, the aesthetics are great, the ergos are great. This knife has a lot of good points. However, it also has some things that are maybe not so good. So I'm about to shock some people here who've seen any videos of mine. I hate lanyard holes. I hate them passionately. This knife especially, I don't think needs one, because I think a lanyard on a gentleman's style knife, which, let's just be honest, it's a pretty knife, it's a gentlemanly knife. A lanyard hole doesn't make a lot of sense. You're not going to be wearing a pair of slacks or a suit or anything like that and carrying a lanyard on your knife. You're just not. And the deepness of the carry of the clip, so it's supposed to disappear, but then you put this lanyard here. It's the only thing I'll say, and the only reason I don't like hate this lanyard hole is that it's really kind of out of the way. It doesn't make the clip have to ride up higher. It's not in any way, aesthetically, I'm not a huge fan because I think it does break up the look of the carbon fiber here, and I think it breaks up like the smooth, like just the cleanliness of the design. I'm not a big fan of that lanyard hole, but I don't hate it as much as I do on some knives. But this one right here, I just don't think it's necessary, and I don't really know if you could really even argue that this knife wouldn't just be straight up better without it. Next thing is, I really, really love Spyderco on almost every knife in every single way. It's a great opening mechanism. Basically it's a great way of opening a knife without having anything that blocks the cutting path of the knife. I like that. The only thing I'll say here is the shape of this knife does not lend itself very well to being Spidey flicked. You can do it, but it's a lot more difficult than on something like a PM2, where you can just bust it out and go, whoop, done. It doesn't really work that way. And from that standpoint, I'm not a huge fan of that. I wish this would maybe just, I'm not entirely sure. I think maybe if this came back just down, maybe like a 1/16 of an inch, it might be a little bit easier to get your finger in there to actually flick it. Some people maybe can do that easier. Maybe it's the size of my hands. I don't know. But I don't like that I can't flick it, especially when I'm used to flicking my Spidey hole knives a lot. Next thing I'm not a huge fan of, on this knife in particular, is actually the blade steel. This is an S30V blade, which is a fantastic everyday carry steel. It's great, it's fine, but this knife is not what I would call like a great everyday carry knife. This is more of almost like a gentleman's knife, and Spyderco has the ability to work with some slightly more upmarket steels. Something like an S90V, like they would put on like the Paisan or something. S90V is like an upmarket steel. And it's the kind of thing you would expect on something that's gentlemanly, and Spyderco can do that. Spyderco can do an M390 blade. Spyderco can do all sorts of knife steels that are certainly much more high scale, upmarket, I don't know. But in general, I think that this should have been a slightly better blade steel. It may have cost a little bit more, but I think that would have been okay, because I think otherwise this knife has earned that price. It just has. I just think a slightly, sexier blade steel like an S90V would have been a great option or a choice for this knife. And maybe, who knows, in the future, maybe they'll update this knife, make the Kapara 2, and they'll make it out of S90V. I don't know. But, it's just something I feel like they could have done, and they didn't. Next thing I think they could have worked on a little bit here is there's no spine jimping at all here. And I think that goes back to the whole concept of this being a gentleman's knife, which, spine jimping here would catch when you're trying to put this in your suit pockets or whatever, nice pair of slacks. You don't want spine jimping because it's going to catch, it's going to do damage. That's probably why this knife is so smooth. A lot of the features of this knife lend itself to being a fantastic in-the-pocket, gentlemanly folder. But that also means that you can slide off this. If you're really, doing hard work, which you could do with an everyday carry knife, this thing right here has no spine jimping. Something like here, you have the spine jimping. My finger will never, ever slip off of that. Ever, ever, ever. But on here, I'm slipping off this thing constantly. And you don't really slip off the finger trail. I don't really feel like it needs it here. This is, really well positioned. I don't ever feel any slippage. But up here, you feel it. And I think that's something that could have been done a little bit differently. But, again, I think probably wasn't from the design decision to make this more of a gentlemanly knife, which contrasts some of the other points that I've discussed and will discuss. Next, I'm going to go with the side profile on this knife is fantastic. I love this. I do think there's a couple little things, I think they should have maybe just made this a one-side tip-up carry only option. They did tip-up only, but they made it so that you could left-hand carry it. Now, the compression lock isn't the most left-hand friendly lock anyway, so I'm not entirely sure why you would need to carry this on the left side. Whatever, but I just think it would have looked a little better without that. But the other thing is the vertical profile, because of the fact that they chose to use non-nested liners, means that I just feel like without seeing these steel liners, I would have been a bit happier. Let's nest those inside the carbon fiber next time and make it even prettier, make it even more of a gentlemanly knife, and it would be even better. Finally, on the things I'm not super big fan of, I go back to this wire clip. Yes, I love how deep it carries, and on some knives I think it's fine, but this knife I don't think so, and the reason is it's too big. This knife is heavy. It's 3.37 ounces. I just weighed it a minute ago. So almost as heavy as a PM2, which is 3.8 ounces. This is a pretty heavy knife, and this clip, smooth carbon fiber, smooth metal clip. If you put this in a pair of suit pocket or a pair of slacks, and this is just you're gonna lose your knife. I mean, you just are. You sit down at a restaurant for a fancy lunch. You're sitting there talking with your business client, if you will. You go to stand up and you realize, oh, it's gone. Yeah, it fell on the floor an hour ago while you were sitting there. You just didn't notice, because this clip is just not that retentive on this knife. Now, if you're wearing a thicker pair of pants, that's fine. But again, this is a gentlemanly knife. I think this is going to be carried in a thinner pair of pants, like a pair of slacks, and it's just going to end up falling out of your pocket. I'm not a fan of that. The wire clip is great in some ways, but some ways it's just not. And in this case, that's one way it's just not. Finally, we get to the thing that I really, really don't like, and I think is maybe my biggest issue with this knife, and it harkens back to what we were just talking about with the clip, and that this knife is too big. This knife is too big. It's a gentlemanly knife. I mean, a lot of the design decisions in here feel like they were made as a gentleman's knife, except the size. The size of this knife is too big. It's 3.6 inches. It's bigger in blade than a PM2. I mean, it's a lot longer. It's much, much larger. Why? What are you doing where you're wearing a suit that you need a 3.6 inch blade? Yes, I realize not everybody's wearing a suit when they carry this knife. I get that. However, a lot of the design decisions, the lack of the jimping, the smoothness of the carbon fiber, the generalized beautification of this knife, make this more of a gentlemanly knife than something like, you know, than it is like a work knife. It's not a work knife. You could use it for that, but it's not that. This is a gentlemanly knife, but it's huge. It's 3.37 ounces, so it's heavy. It's 3.6-inch blades, so it's big. I can't see any reason why this knife couldn't have been made, let's say a 3.25-inch blade, something a little smaller than a PM2 in length. Continuing along with its profile of this knife, you could make it just everything just a little smaller, just a little smaller, just a little smaller. Ditch this stupid thing. You know, then the clip wouldn't matter as much because the smoothness of the clip, it would weigh less. This knife would be lighter. If it was lighter, you wouldn't have to worry about the clip retention. In general, every aspect of this knife that I don't like comes back to, I think it's too big for what it is. I just think a gentleman's knife does not need to be this big, and this is this big. And it is a gentleman's knife, or at least the closest thing I think Spyderco has ever made to a gentleman's knife. So, in general, I think in a lot of ways, this knife is great. It's just, it's too big. It's too big. So, for my final verdict, and, you know, would I recommend this knife to other people? This has been a tough one for me. Because in some ways, I really do love this knife. A lot, actually. I think this is the best looking knife Spyderco has actually ever made. That, to my eye, I mean, maybe you're different. Maybe you like other knives better. But this one, to me, is the best looking knife they've ever made. However, where I live, I can't carry this knife. It's too long. It's 3.6 inches. We have 3.5-inch laws here. It's dumb. Guess what? That's the state that Spyderco is based in. They're based in Colorado, and you can't carry this knife in the state that they're based in. I know they have other knives like that, but again, this is a gentleman's knife. I feel like this should probably be more legal, more places, and it's not even legal in the place where the company's based, so, you know, whatever. However, it looks fantastic. The action on this knife is fantastic. I love how this knife looks. I love how it feels in your hand. I love how it operates. I love this knife. So if you live in an area with 3.5-inch laws, obviously I'm going to go with don't buy this knife. If you live in an area that doesn't have 3.5-inch laws, I would say 100% this is a must-buy Spyderco. It's the best looking Spyderco I think there's ever been. I'm sure you can get some sort of clip that's maybe a little bit better than this that would fit in the same slot as the deep carry wire clip for Spyderco. I don't know, I haven't looked into that, but it's something I would consider if I could legally carry this outside my house. But I think just in general, this knife is great, and I would highly recommend this to anybody who doesn't have 3.5-inch laws. I love this knife. I think a lot of people would. And in general, I think it's a great knife. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you guys think of the Kapara. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.